Welcome. Gonna do a quick video today doing my reaction feedback to a video I saw here. Looks like a college campus, Pennsylvania. This is a short segment from an introductory class on race and culture that is taught by Dr. Sam Richards at Penn State University. So the discussion is going to be about class on race and culture. Let's see what they have to say. And they're also going to be doing a social experiment talking about what quote unquote conservatives believe. I would consider myself conservative in some regards, libertarian in other regards, progressive in a lot of other things too. I'm sort of a mixed batch. I have a lot of friends on both sides, some that are mostly dedicated Democrat, leftist progressives, and some that are strong, hardcore, conservative, traditional Trump supporters. And I always like to stay as unbiased and blank slated as possible when getting all perspectives. Because in my mind, I'm always thinking I should be able to have my mind changed. I am willing to have my mind changed if the argument is good and strong enough and the evidence is strong as well. So, let's see what these guys got to say. Let's see if I can get this all the way up here. Turn this down.
Issues.
Let's see here.
Debates and issues related, say, to this class. So race, gender, class, culture, national origin, sex. We're going to talk about sociological issues related to this class, a wide range of issues. We're going to imagine that a more conservative person is teaching this class and that they have an agenda. And their agenda is to come in here and get people in this class to think a certain way, like they think about all these issues. And so they're going to walk into this room with certain assumptions. These are the kinds of things that they read and that they watch solely. So the question is, what are some of the assumptions that they have? And this is the first page. You're going to start here. Just what are some of the assumptions? Just help us think together as a class. And you all should, before one of you starts, you all should start thinking about this, right? What are some of the assumptions?
Going on to immigration, I think that someone with that considers himself more conservative will be strongly against illegal immigration. Not to say like immigration as a whole, but definitely illegal immigration. That will be one of their key points.
So another conservative perspective would be small government, looking at the economic side, lower taxes, less regulation, more of a free market economy.
So what would that mean for these issues? You're right. You're absolutely right. So what would it mean for these issues?
This is a great way to teach. I love that this professor is doing this experiment to really engage the critical thinking and to put yourself in the shoes of the quote-unquote conservative of today, of 2023. What do they think like? Where they get their information from? Who they generally support? They showed a picture of Donald Trump, Fox News, Breitbart, The Blaze, etc., etc. And what the professor instructed these students to do is how they think about certain things. Give us a general theme, general denominator that conservatives typically push for. What are their conclusions about the world? What is their worldview about specific things, to immigration, to economics, to race, to culture, etc., etc. And this is great. I think everyone needs to go through this to get a wide 360-degree understanding of one side, a group of people. Because one thing that I'm realizing as I get more and more into politics is that people generalize, unfortunately. People generalize, and they also don't like to be around people that disagree with them, because it's a very touchy thing. It can be very uncomfortable right? But in reality, it's best that we do discuss these things and we can say, I agree to disagree, and it's cool. No big deal. Keep it civil, keep it fine, and recognize that you're simply discussing and disagreeing on ideas, not necessarily you personally. Because the amount of maturity needed for us to really exercise our First Amendment of free speech and have dialogue and debate, which is something that we have lost in this country, we need to be able to connect the bridge, reestablish the civility that we used to have in this nation of being able to discuss controversial stuff and then maybe come to compromising on things. And also not allowing the media of both sides or the echo chamber on both sides to really add fuel to the fire and really divide us even further. And the rhetoric can get really extreme, and people can really paint the other side, paint the opponent's side in this really terrible way, to where we start to see people explode and overreact and do disgusting things like murdering or killing somebody simply because they believe in this, this, and this, or they voted for this, this, and this, or they're associated with this political party.
In this class.
So I would talk about how no matter what socioeconomic status you come from, it provides the fastest platform from you to get to A to B, from poor to prosperous, because you get to keep your revenue, you get to keep your income, you get to keep reinvesting in yourself, in your company, whatever your idea is. And that's kind of the conservative way to tackle that problem versus the government just dealing with it.
Maybe like when it comes to class, that could be like less social programs such as like food stamps and welfare, and that could affect different people very differently. So those are larger government programs that will increase taxes but give out to lower class.
And we should have them, we should not have them.
Well, from a right kind of viewpoint, that is typically unpopular.
So it's going to be unpopular. So for this person,
I'm going to disagree with this generalization on conservatives. A lot of conservatives, this is where I would side with the conservatives in regard to the view and approach that we have with the social safety net welfare system that we have now. I'm not going to get into the welfare system of Social Security. It's a totally different discussion. But as far as the safety net for food stamps, et cetera, we need to get out. Actually, I'm a progressive in this sense that the old ways of the 60s and 70s of just giving money out to the poor, and for one, breaking up the nuclear family that we saw in the 60s and 70s, that were incentivizing basically women to marry the government, saying that they can't have a man in the house providing sources of income, that they have to be single, and then they can qualify for these welfare funds. I think that needs to be destroyed. That is very destructive, and that also highlights the point that simply blindly giving out money to those that are in an unfortunate circumstance that have fallen does not work. It does not work. It's an old way of thinking, and it's something we need to progress out of. And I don't know why, quote unquote, progressives keep trying to conserve this old idea. See, the way I use the word conservative, I use it in the literal sense. The literal definition of the conservative is simply someone that's trying to conserve old ways culturally, old ways politically, and old ways as far as systems and mindsets, et cetera, et cetera. It's simply someone that's trying to conserve and continue certain things that happened in the past. This can be anything, really. Now, of course, there is the other definition, which is the more political philosophy of conservatism, which that in itself changes and morphs into different things, and I'm not going to get into that. So whenever I say conservatism, I'm talking about the literal definition of the word conservatism, which is very simple, trying to conserve certain practices, beliefs, systems, etc. So the welfare system that we have as today that stemmed from the 60s and 70s, we shouldn't conserve that. We need to progress out of that. And the conservatives of today haven't really come up with a solution of what's something new that should be implemented. One idea that I have is education funds, taxpayer going into education to the lower class of those in the welfare system for them to segue into other industry. It could be under entrepreneurship. It could be into anything, really. Because the idea of the safety net that we have is really that it's a unfortunate circumstance that the individual has put themselves in where they need financial support, and the government can provide that temporarily. And the assumption is, you need to get back on your feet. We will help you get back on your feet, and here's the money. But as far as how they approach that, getting back on your feet, we need to get out of this whole thing of just giving them money blindly, which is the point I'm trying to make. The approach of education being the most powerful approach, I think it's the most powerful thing. Helping them with their resume, helping them getting a specific trade. Maybe they can go to trade school, get a trade education. Maybe they can get into internships. We can create certain programs and tax breaks that we give to certain corporations or industries to say, we'll give you a tax break if you train this individual to get into your particular industry. I mean, there's so many different approaches that we can have depending on what sector it is, depending on what needs we have. If we need more farmers, if we need more oil men, if we need more pilots for airplanes, if we need more whatever, teachers, whatever it can be, we can use those funds to not, instead of just giving it directly to them, get an education. Use those funds for education. That's one idea that I have. So I would say both conservatives and progressives get the welfare system incorrect. Truly, they do. And there's some elements of that quote unquote some conservatives say, but most of them haven't really said what I'm saying in regards to, because some conservatives genuinely believe that we should completely abolish the welfare system, and they think that the government does more harm than good. I understand that argument. And then there's some conservatives where they believe that that we are giving way too much money to the government to create these jobs, and we have these federal jobs where their whole livelihood is dependent on continuing the welfare system, which I think that has a lot of factual truth to it. Whenever you have a position in a government that is dependent on a grievance or trying to assist or solve a particular problem, they're never going to actually want to solve the problem, because if they actually do solve the problem, then they will have a job. So that's the issue. One of the issues with relying and being dependent on the government is it creates these bureaucracies. It creates these people that they're not going to fire themselves. So do they truly want to solve the problem? No. And this creates this dysfunctional system that we have in place now. And then also on the citizen side, the welfare recipient side, I forgot who said this, but per dollar, it's about 70 to 80 cents of the dollar goes to the welfare system to just do the system and provide it, and pay the people that are doing the welfare system itself, the welfare provider. And then the welfare receiver receives typically 20 cents to 30 cents of that dollar, that taxpayer dollar. See, that is a broken system. That is something that needs to be fixed. We shouldn't be creating jobs that incentivize bad behavior. We shouldn't be creating jobs that's dependent on bad behavior either. It just sets a bad precedence. It incentivizes bad behavior, and it continues the problem versus actually trying to resolve it. The question is, what truly resolves and lifts up people out of poverty and out of unfortunate circumstances if they fall on their ass, right? We should have a system that lifts them up, helps them, but it is tactical, it is specific, and it isn't just this blind approach of just giving them money.
If you're going to have a small government, that means you can't have lots of government handouts to anybody, right? So this is really essential. And so we're going to start cutting all these kinds of government programs.
I think from a conservative perspective with, small government race issues, so race issues being socioeconomic status, being discrimination, like since it's more of a free market approach, small government, like a conservative approach to solve that would be, like I said earlier, lower taxes, let you keep more of your income to reinvesting in yourself. And it would be a more, how do you say, personally dealt with problem versus the government trying to fix it for you. And that would be the conservative approach, to just be, you putting in effort and you finding something that works, and then you
Okay.
keep what you.
So a lot of what this guy said, conservative values, he's factual, the kid in the blue. The point I want to add to this is where this stems from. It stems from Milton Friedman. He is an economist, and a lot of stuff he said is true and factual. And he was a capitalist. Milton Friedman was, and he was a great economist. There's plenty of books he wrote, and he kind of shaped and molded the conservative economic mindset that we have today. Now, what Milton Friedman pointed out that I actually agree with strongly is that there are two ways to resolve any issue in a country. If you have a problem, there's two ways to resolve it, and there's only two. That's it. Either the free market or the government. And this is where the left, the right, conservatives, leftists, conservatives, liberals, etc., the Democrats, Republicans, will have great disagreement. Because depending on the situation and circumstance, people will say, well, the government should step in and give out free things for that individual to either make it cheaper, to make it more affordable, to make it more accessible, to be considerate to a certain race, to be considerate to a certain class, the lower class, whatever it may be. And you'll see them make justifications for beefing up and using the government to solve these issues versus the free market. Now, there are pros and cons, I will say, depending on what it is, to strictly using the free market to solve problems, and also giving the government the authority to solve problems, or also giving the government a monopoly control on certain things. For example, the United States Postal Service can be very egregious, can be a bad experience, and it's just terrible overall. But they have a monopoly on mailing. The U.S. Postal Service does. Now, we do have FedEx and UPS and DHL that does shipping of boxes and all that stuff, shipping of material. But as far as your mail and postage and paper mail, etc., most of the time the USPS has a monopoly on that, and that's ran by the federal government. In my opinion, whenever you go to USPS, the reviews and the experience is terrible. Terrible. Versus when I go to UPS or FedEx, my experience is drastically better. This is just my first-hand experience. It could be just a location. I don't know. But you look at the reviews also of USPS on Google, a lot of places, they all reflect the same thing. That the customer service is terrible, terrible attitude, disorganized, lied to, overcharged, whatever it could be. There's a lot of different reasons for that. Not going to dissect that. But if you allow the free market to force them to compete, the free market forces people to be held accountable, because if you are not living up to a good standard and you're not prioritizing the consumer experience and giving a good product and providing good value, then those businesses typically go out of business. So, for example, USPS and the standard that it's at right now should be out of business because of its terrible structure and how it's ran. But who's competing with the USPS as far as your mail is concerned? Nobody. Now, as far as delivering packages, you do have options of FedEx and UPS. I typically give my money to UPS. There's been times where I'll pay sometimes double the price just for the peace of mind and the great experience that I have with UPS. Right? The free market, me as a consumer, I have more power. Me as a consumer, I'm putting my money to incentivize and continue the good experience and keep those good businesses continuing. But that's an example I'm giving you guys where the government fails terribly, and they have a monopoly on that, and it's like a trap. There's nothing that can be done. But this is why conservatives typically resort. They have more faith in the free market for a multitude of reasons, because it forces people to compete, and whoever has the best service, best experience, best product, they dominate, and it's win-win for not only the business making money, but also the consumer having a great experience, everything running fashionably, everything running good, etc., etc.
You make.
Okay, awesome. So here it is. Ready? Y'all are doing great. So here, if you're going to have a small government and you have problems with race or gender or something like that, then you solve it on your own. Like, don't come to the government and make a big government. And then what I hear you saying is start passing laws and all sorts.
So in regards to race and gender, there's been a lot of things that the progressives have gotten right. The left has gotten right, historically speaking, 50 years ago to 100 years ago. Now, the whole title stuff is kind of, I don't know, it's just odd to me. But like the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, the passing of the 13th Amendment and 14th Amendment that really exterminated, as far as the law is concerned, the Constitution is concerned, exterminated and abolished colorism and judgment of color through race, segregation, and belittling and seeing black men or black people as less than and not having equal rights, etc., etc., etc. That is where the government does a better job, and the government is needed to enforce those things. And that is where political philosophies like progressivism, like liberalism, has gotten things right. Liberalism, to keep it short, really is just liberating any restraints or constrictions or limits to each individual, not groups, but individual. That's what liberalism is in its purest form. When you look at the father of liberalism, John Locke, he had a great emphasis on natural rights given to each individual and maximizing that individual's rights, authority, and to protect that equally under the eyes of the law, to make sure that there is no tyranny, no encroachment of that, etc., etc. So, using that political philosophy of liberalism, this is where we saw the liberation of black folks being seen as less than, because the discrimination, the constraint that limit their individual rights was what at that particular time? Racism. Seeing them as less than, seeing them as not human, seeing them as not, as black folks, as not being able to be civilized, or seeing them as not being able to self-govern themselves. This is all limiting beliefs that white folks, white politicians, particular parties in the South used to have to justify segregation and slavery. So, again, this is where I side with different political philosophies depending on what it is. And conservatives get this wrong sometimes, depending on what it is. And Democrats and the left get this right. Because if we didn't have, if we didn't have the 13th and 14th Amendment, which, let's get this right, Republicans were pushing for that, and enacted that. One can say that was for votes, whatever you want to call it. And the Civil Rights Act of 1965 also was pushed by Democrats. So you see this flip back and forth of Democrats and Republicans. This is why I don't do this hard debate of which party is the best, of which one's more or less racist, yada, 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 because, again, it's too many complexities, and you can't generalize on that. I'm just talking about the political philosophy and how it's benefited and when it should be implemented, and certain times where it should not be implemented. This is the beauty of our First Amendment. This is a beauty of a democracy, which is really that we discuss the idea and the best idea wins. That's really what a democracy is. You make a strong argument, you make the case for it, you look at studies, you look at statistics, you look at history to make your case, and you present it, and people buy into that particular idea or vision, and you go from there. And this is where different approaches in political philosophy have to be implemented, which is why we must have discussions and we must disagree with each other and say that we dissent or concur. That's the whole idea behind my YouTube channel, is to be able to discuss those things. Let's continue here. I talk too much.
Sorts of things, and like the government's going to come in and fix it all because you don't want that. It's not in anyone's interest. Okay.
Just kind of like to elaborate on that last point, it's kind of, they see it as hindering.
To make this quick point, in the particular timeline of before the 14th Amendment and the 13th Amendment were passed, which is basically the abolishment of slavery and seeing black men as less than, the conservatives at that particular time were those trying to conserve the Constitution before the 13th and 14th Amendment. Those trying to conserve slavery, those trying to conserve segregation, those trying to conserve that black people were not equal, that black people were less than, etc., etc. At that particular timeline, those were the conservatives, in the literal definition of the word. Now, the progressives, the progressive belief in progressing out of, and the liberalism at that particular timeline were correct to abolish that old belief and pass the 13th and 14th Amendment and move forward to the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Act of the 60s and 70s. It was great. Those were necessary things that were successful, but I'm just pointing out how things can flip back and forth and how certain philosophical beliefs can get it right and sometimes they can get it wrong.
On their freedoms, because more rules and more laws mean like less freedoms, and that kind of goes against their American ideals.
I feel, yeah, human beings all came from Africa. So they're in their genetic things, there are not so many difference. Just because of geography or something, we may have the difference in our appearance.
You. Okay, so a conservative perspective is going to say, listen, we're really not different. We're the same. Stop making us stop talking about all of our differences and start talking about our similarities. Because in the end, that's a great deal of what it is.
Issues such as like.
So this is a very strong argument, and a lot of conservatives do believe this. And whenever the founding fathers created this nation, they were operating in a certain paradigm and conditions that they had socially that they were bound to because of that timeline and where they came from and their upbringing. That was normal, that was the standard, and that's what they did to survive at that particular timeline. I was reading Clarence Thomas's opinion about the overturning of affirmative action, and he kept talking about the second founding of this nation, which is the 13th and 14th Amendment, which is abolishing of slavery, equal for all, and then giving citizenship to the slaves and saying that they have equal rights and that no longer we will allow color and white supremacy and laws that discriminate and don't treat everyone equally, no matter your race or gender, etc., etc. That was the second founding of this nation. Now, one can say that that is the new conservative that we have right now. The conservatives have bought into that idea. And I don't know. I don't know. I look at it and I get kind of confused because it just really depends on the timeline. This is why I think these boxes we put each other in of like conservative and all that stuff, it's so vague, it's so abstract, and it changes throughout time. That being said, the quote-unquote conservatives like Clarence Thomas, a black Supreme Court judge, he made the case in affirmative action whenever he concurred that it should be overturned and that it should no longer be used, was a color blindness and color neutral, meaning that we should continue the vision of Martin Luther King, being judging of your character, not your skin tone. and the 13th and 14th Amendment, the second founding of this nation, which emphasized, again, no laws, no discrimination, nothing should be used against you for your privilege or to oppress you based on your race, skin tone, gender, etc., etc. So this is where conservatives get their idea, because they emphasize that point because conservatives emphasize nationalism and they emphasize citizenship. And conservatives tend to believe that we are all Americans and we are all a part of the tribe of Americans. And they believe that that is a better way to view the world, that is the most ideal way to function a nation as diverse as America is. And they think that is a more uniting worldview to be a part of the tribe of America and Americans versus this sub definition and this tribalism that we've put ourselves in of dividing each other based on race and gender. And that's the general consensus of conservatives in that regard.
Race and gender aren't always the main concern. The main concern, like even the way they were describing them, come from a more economic perspective, like even the way they were, using like small government, those type of things to describe
So that's
it.
the main concern.
So they're saying I think that would be a more conservative thing to say that is the main concern, and then to flip it, the liberal side would be more
Okay.
that they are really big issues.
What do you get?
Yes. So from a conservative perspective, I would expect to learn that you work for what you want. So basically, we're all given the opportunity to work.
The quote unquote leftist, progressive, collectivist worldview is the idea that we should be and ought to be and are judged and divided by our skin tone and race. And we should view the world from this lens instead of the opposite side of, which is the right, of Americanism and citizenship and all being Americans and being colorblind. So the left and liberalism emphasizes and puts more importance on color differences instead of class and sex difference for male and female to tackle specific things that are related to the race. It's more of a micro analysis to tackle these things with the assumption that, for one, the race experiences the same thing and that the problems within a race is common and broad and large. So, for example, the premise of this belief is that black folks experience oppression in America. And that's one reason why America has not served them well. And that's one reason why we see black folks being poor. And that's one reason why we see black folks incarcerated. And they'll say that because a lot of the majority black folks are the poorest race in America, then we can conclude this, this, and this. And it's just an analysis from that perspective. Instead of using class of a lower class, they break it down to race and divide it into race, Asians, white, etc., etc. And I disagree with that. I think it served a purpose in the past. I think depending on what it is and what you're trying to tackle, it works really well. But what we're finding out now is a lot of these arguments of, for example, women making less money than men, right? If you just put this broad brush of saying women make less money than men without putting into account the hundreds of different variables and different things that women do differently than men, as far as just the sex, they found out, for example, that women just work less hours and are willing to work less hours than men. And men were willing to work more hours, and men were willing to do more riskier jobs that paid out more, and women were doing different jobs. They just desired different jobs that paid less, they work less, and that was a difference in the sexes. And what people were trying to make clear or to claim is that, well, no, that's a discrepancy. That is a systematic problem. That is oppression of women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been debunked because it's not the system itself or people hiring women. Like, for example, if women were just as productive as men and worked just as long as men, and we can get away with paying less to women, then a lot of these jobs would just hire women. But you don't see that because, again, women just don't get into some of these fields that are high risk, high stress. Like, for example, sales, full commission sales. You just don't see many women doing full commission sales. It's a very stressful job. It's a very masculine-oriented job. But that particular job of full commission, you tend to make a lot of money. You also don't see women getting into entrepreneurship. And it's just they found out that it's more a reflection of the sex and their desires versus it being a discrimination and some sort of oppression or system that's broken that favors men. And we're seeing the same thing with race, is that whenever you just break down the data and statistics in that particular way of sex and race, you can frame things in a certain light that's not accurate with actual problem. So a lot of people will weaponize this for political reasons to say that women and blacks and whites and yada yada yada, and this it's all political, which is where I disagree with it, because I understand that it's used as a weapon to make a point and paint a picture and narrative that's not true. And they use that to attack the other side of the other idea, right? And it's just that's politics, and that's something that we need to get away from, and we need to look beyond the superficial and surface level communication of things and really be able to look at things from a balanced perspective. Like, for example, let's find a point I'm going to make here of why black folks, like they'll look at the data and say, well, we see that black folks are the poorest race in America in comparison to white folks, Hispanics, and Asians. And they'll make a generalization to say that, well, it's because black folks were left, that it's because of slavery, it's because of segregation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll blame the system and then say the system caused this problem. That means the system and government have to correct it. And they'll sometimes make the problem worse. So anyways, I digress. Kind of get into the weeds here, but we'll continue on.
We're all given the opportunity to go out there is how you use it. So it's not our problem because you get to go to college, you get to do these things. So it's up to you.
To make of your life what
Yeah,
you
it's
can.
up to you to make up your life.
I mean, relating it to an education perspective, it'd be very anti-affirmative action as a conservative viewpoint, because it allows people based on different
Meritocracy, meritocratic. That's what conservatism typically believes, pulling yourself up from your own bootstraps. They have an emphasis of that. They have an emphasis of no matter your past, no matter your parents' upbringing, no matter where you were raised, that does not define you. You can pull yourself up, and America is a land of so much opportunity that if there is a will, there is a way. And if you just understand the free markets, understand capitalism, understand that creating a product, that you can get out of your great oppression and you being born in a less fortunate situation.
racial
That is the conservative assumption here.
and ethnic backgrounds to get into colleges easier because of past discrimination.
So it allows, it carries people through hoops
Yeah, it carries people through.
that they, not on their own volition.
Just that everyone starts out of the same.
And the assumption, depending on where you stand, is the conservative side says you can achieve anything in America. This is America. You can do it. there's a will, there's a way, right? They instill hope, possibility, and there are plenty of people that, statistically speaking, if you look at where they were raised, where they were from, and how poor they were, like for example, Clarence Thomas was born in segregation. He was raised in a broken family. He dealt with blatant racism from black folks and from white folks in the South, in Georgia. He was raised in a very poor area. And if you look at the data and statistics of his success rate of where he would be at right now of being in the highest court, Supreme Court judge as a black man in that particular timeline, the statistics would not be in his favor. They'd be very, very, very low. I would assume in the single digits low of the possibility of him ending up where he's at right now. That's the conservative vision and conclusion, that because there is a percentage of possible success, you can still do it and ought to do it and risk doing it as well, because it's worth doing the risk taking, believing in yourself, investing in yourself, self-actualization. That is the conservative foundation and the conservative assumption in regards to solving the poverty problem and the whole you being born in a less fortunate situation and getting a head start or jump start versus others. Versus the opposite side assumes you need the government to help you, the government ought to help you, the government ought to create a safety net, the government needs to create systems that gives you more privileges because you started out with less privileges. And this is where you have a divide in our nation.
Level, essentially.
Uh-huh.
Like, regardless of race or gender.
Yeah, like something else I want to like say on that point was, if like I'm speaking as conservative, that if we treat people like they're starting at a different line, then they'll end up at a different line because of the government's like piggybacking and assisting. But if we just kind of treat everyone equally, the belief will be that everything will become equal.
Okay, so you're saying the idea, a core idea would be, listen, just treat people equally. That's an important thing, and then let the chips fall where they fall. What's each side missing? We're going to start with the conservative side. What are they missing?
Yeah, so someone said that conservatives believe that we all start off like on the same level playing field, and I disagree with that. I don't think that's the conservative viewpoint. Conservatives believe that the world is inherently unequal, but we can't change that. What we can do is give everyone equal opportunity. So instead of worrying about who has more privilege in regards to gender, race, social status, economic status, whatever it may be, we should work on facing the issues and giving equal opportunity.
100% correct. 1,000% correct.
I was just going to say that conservatives like believe that traditional values should be like held for like what was like traditional in the past should also be like what you do now, but you also have to recognize that times are changing, so not everything that was like traditional back then can be used now because like stuff is different now than it was back then.
Terrible argument to say that something that because the times are changing that we should continue to change and that laws should change. Throughout history, if you study history, you will see that humans can progress into their own destruction. That throughout time, humans can tolerate their demise without even realizing it. Look at countries in South America, Central America, etc., etc. Look at the great leap forward that happened in China that caused a great famine of millions and millions and millions of people that died. Humans can be easily deceived. Humans can be easily manipulated and will lead to their demise, lead to their death. So what the Constitution, the Founding Fathers emphasize and get right, in my opinion, is the natural rights and natural emphasis of individuality and limits in the government and checks and balances. The Constitution is one of the most brilliant documents ever created. It's not perfect. That being said, we're not going to progress out of free speech. We need free speech. But I guarantee you there is a percentage of people in the nation that they can't tolerate speech. They can't tolerate someone that disagrees with them. There's people that genuinely believe we should silence, imprison, or kill someone that disagrees with them or has a certain type of belief. It's just terrible. So people can get things wrong all the time. We can progress to be a weaker society, a society that tolerates too much, a society that accepts degeneracy and pernicious, destructive things that a nation can't have or tolerate. So never believe that just because people are moving towards this or we're accepting something or it's the new thing, which really there's nothing new. It's just a new name, new terminology, whatever, that we should tolerate it. We have 3,000 years, 2,000 years of human history, right? The only thing that really is advanced that's different now is going to be technology, AI, smartphones, and all that stuff. And they're just more conveniences. But as far as the nature of man, that's not going to change. It's never going to change. And we have history to validate this. But I can't stand, it's such a weak argument to say because it's tolerated now that we should just erase and get rid of old traditions. It's terrible. It's a terrible argument.
I don't think a conservative necessarily would be teaching a class like this.
Would
be teaching a class like this.
They wouldn't even be teaching this class.
Yeah,
But
so-
if, okay,
What I'm saying is, for them, race basically isn't even in their vocabulary.
okay, got you. All right.
And it's not like the African dream or Latin American dream, it's the American dream. So it's for everyone.
Okay, so what are they missing then? So they would say, hey, I'm not going to teach this class. This doesn't make sense. Don't even talk about it. What are they missing?
That's what they're missing. They feel the need to speak of this. And
So they're missing the idea, but what are they missing? Like, what is so rich about this or good about this? Like, what premise are they missing? Like, what could they get out of a class like this that they're not even going to pay attention to?
to get like basically all the closed-minded aspects out of
What the teacher is trying to pry out of this kid is realizing that there are differences that should be observed from the lens of color, race, ethnicity, gender, etc., to where you can break these down, break statistic down, divide people in these certain boxes to observe and see discrepancies. Now, it's a great point. I do think that conservatives should be able to view things from that lens. That being said, laws should not be enforced or viewed from this lens of women getting more privileges or less privileges. It doesn't matter if it's for the greater good of the race or the sex. You can't have both. You can't use the thing that was used in the past to discriminate and oppress to then give them privileges or correct the things of the past. We either move on from it or we don't. That's the issue. Too many people don't realize that you're just continuing this cycle of viewing the world from this divided lens of race, black, white, women, men, divide, and you just continuously divide. And the question is, from a general standpoint, what is a better solution? Not a perfect solution, but a better, more stable, more impactful, more unifying way to view the world in a country like America that we see people having kids from different cultures and genders, or excuse me, different cultures and ethnicities that we didn't have very common long ago, right? We used to be all divided, but even then, our ancestors were conquered. We don't know our ancestry. So the whole social construct of race is very shifty. It's an amorphous. It's hard to quantify, and it's very complex, and it's very unstable, which is why it should be abolished, which is why it should not be conserved. What these students and that teacher is not realizing is that we used that particular worldview and analysis and breakdown to divide, to expose people that were using laws whenever it was legally so to oppress, to segregate, to bring down people of a certain sex or skin tone. And it worked well because the statistics were blatantly obvious, and they can pinpoint that the main reason for this issue that continues is because of laws that were enforced, that are still being enforced. But as we progress forward, we have to move out of that and say, and it's hard to, I get it, because one side will say it's a race issue that needs to be resolved racially, and then another side would say, well, it's a class issue and it should be solved by that particular class.
That meaning.
Well, what are they though? What are those?
Meaning that people are treated.
Closed-minded is a
unequal.
judgment. So go ahead.
Meaning people are treated unequally here.
Okay.
A
What else?
conservative would say that everyone's equal with equal opportunities here in the United States.
Okay, so, all right, dudes, all right, cool, I got that. What else? What else would conservatives be missing by not teaching this class?
So I would say that conservatives, they tend to be like wealthy white people or men, and they don't really get the experience of knowing what it means or what it feels like to be disadvantaged, and not have an experience where once you start at like a figurative.
Bro, I can tell this guy got that information from TikTok, Snapchat, Facebook, 10-second videos, pictures, whatever bullshit, and he lives in this echo chamber. I can tell, like, when you regurgitate the most preposterous generalization like this guy is doing right now, the conservatives are majority white men. This is the issue with identity politics. This is the problem with divisive rhetoric and obsession of race and gender and viewing the world from that lens. Is you come to the conclusion that, it has to be the white man, the rich white man, the white man that's never experienced oppression. The assumption there is that all white men in America are wealthy and rich? That we don't have white men in America that are extremely poor? This is the delusion. This is the delusion. This is why you have to have discussions and stay calm, cool, and collected. There's a lot of conservatives that are black. There's a lot of conservatives that are Asian. There's a lot of conservatives that are Hispanic. A lot of conservatives that are minority women. These ideas, politically speaking, are not attached to a sex or race.
Starting line.
Okay.
And they know that you're born different and you're born disadvantaged, but saying that because you have equal opportunities, you're able to succeed equally, right?
Okay.
But they're missing the idea of knowing that there are actual limitations for you to be successful, even if you have seemingly the same opportunities.
Politics is a reflection of your inner world. That is what politics is from an individual perspective. I'm not talking about parties. But people will associate with parties because it's a reflection of their inner world. So if you have an inner world conclusion that I'm black and I can't achieve things in this nation, then you will affirm that and look for things to affirm that conclusion that you have about the world. And politics is just simply a vehicle for you to continue that conclusion that you have and to find solutions around that very naive conclusion. This guy just said that conservatives don't realize that there are limitations that you have. What limitations are you talking about? We have black mayors, black chief of police, black senators, black congressmen, black governors. What are you talking about? Black president for 8 years. black entrepreneurs. We have millions of black millionaires. We have billionaires that are black. If you live in America and you're black, your chances of being a six-figure earner or a millionaire are higher here than anywhere else in the world. You have more rights and privileges here in America. If you live in America, just by the simple fact of living in America, the wealthiest nation in the world currently and in the history of mankind ever, that is a privilege. That is a privilege that you have. You are more well off here than the majority of the world.
You have the sense that most people who embrace a conservative perspective are wealthier and tend to be white, which is not true. Okay,
But I'm saying like mostly, not like it's not an absolute. But I'm saying like most of the time. That's
I
what
wouldn't
you'll
even say
find.
most of the time because that doesn't explain Donald Trump voters, but nonetheless, right?
Terrible. This guy, this goes to show the consequences of family, of social media, of not having people that disagree with you, of living in this echo chamber. Like I said, politics is simply a reflection of your inner world. It really is. And you project it out. Whatever beliefs you have, whatever conclusions you have, whatever paradigm you're operating from, you will project that out. That includes your morals, all your virtues, all your beliefs, all your traumas, etc., etc. All will be. That's how you can. That's how you come to conclusions about politics, really.
But nonetheless, I get the perspective, right? That's a perception. But what you're saying,
and that perspective is bullshit.
and what you're saying is really very much on point, is that what conservatives are missing is some kind of experience. It seems to me some kind of experience of disadvantage, right? Barriers and things that are happening, you know, like understanding of what those are.
Yeah,
right?
and you could also say that most people who are privileged, like the privilege is invisible to them.
Yeah,
so like, you know, you don't really notice it that you're privileged in a certain way.
Yep.
So if you're like a conservative that, you know, goes through life and, you know, knowing that you face
Look how diverse this college campus is. Indian, Hispanic, Asian, Black, African, white. Look at your surroundings. That is progress. The simple fact that you're around people that 100 years ago you were not able to be surrounded by those people, that it was nowhere near as diverse as it is now, shows progress that we have made. Is it perfect? No. But it is progress of just simply having access to resources and opportunities that were not given to your ancestors or not allowed 100 to 200 to 300 years ago. That is all that you should be asking for, which is the conservative belief. If you're in this education system here, you're doing better than most people around the world. You're doing better than most of your ancestors that were enslaved or segregated here in this nation. You're more well off. And a lot of those people in the past would argue that that's what they were fighting for, was just simply for you to be seated where you're at, brother. Where you're at, brother. That's what your ancestors were fighting for. To simply educate your mind. Get out of bad mindsets, limiting beliefs, destructive worldviews, and for you to become a productive citizen for your bloodline and lineage. That's all they were fighting for. Because 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it was literally impossible. The laws were against you. You couldn't own land. It was impossible. The land of opportunity and freedom was not there for black people. Was not there. It's the opposite now.
Universities and you like succeed after them, you're then like more likely to be like, oh, because you're black before you're Latino, because you're
Got it.
Asian, if you're going through this, you're able to succeed too because you
Okay.
can overcome.
I found it interesting that you zeroed in on a critique. You were able, the class by and large, and it may just be who we chose and who spoke up, but the class by and large was able to zero in on a critique of conservatism, the core ideas of conservatism, much more quickly and much more succinctly than the core ideas of liberalism. And I think it's because most people in here lean toward a more liberal perspective because you're college students for whatever reason, right? So let me
It's not for whatever reason. Typically, people that are in their youth are going to be more liberal. And that's because they're full of idealism. They're full of how things ought to be without attachment and understanding of reality. They're naive. They're ignorant. Nothing wrong with that. I was there. I'm still there. I'm still learning. I'm seeing the flaws. And I hope that this is the reason I started the YouTube channel, is to educate the masses of people of seeing the limitations of how they believe and view the world. Because every single belief system, liberal, conservative, libertarian, progressivism, leftism, etc., has flaws and limitations, which is why there are good things that we can take out of all of them, and we can use their particular tactics and worldviews and conclusions to specific instances, and we can also test their ideas and see what works. For example, California is a progressive, leftist state, ran by progressives and a leftist. Very different than compared to Texas. Totally, I've lived in both states. Texas and California are almost like two different countries. Culturally speaking, as far as the laws, as far as taxation, as far as the people, as far as economically speaking, etc., etc. And I'm not going to get into the differences. I'm probably going to make another video about the difference between California and Texas and why I prefer and love Texas. But the point I'm trying to make here is that your idea is great as far as you can persuade people to buy into that particular idea or solution. And also, once the idea is implemented, what was the outcomes of those things? For example, there's a lot of liberal progressive ideas that sound good at face value, but once implemented, does more harm than good. For example, progressives, DAs, district attorneys, for example, San Francisco, they said that we're not going to arrest or charge anyone that steals items less than $1,000, I think it was, or $950. And that was to, I'm not sure why that was. I think it was to alleviate the pressure or burden that the police at that particular location had to deal with. But what they saw was crime ramped up, theft ramped up even more because criminals are realizing that they're not going to prosecute. It's just a slap in the hand. And unless the cops saw it actively happening, they weren't going to arrest them. But if someone was reporting it happening, and if it was less than $900 or $1,000, they don't care. Now, I'm not sure what the arguments were to be so lenient on law enforcement. But in San Francisco, which is the most left-leaning progressive city, we can see the consequences of that city being destroyed, really, by homelessness, heroin issues. Another thing the progressives were saying at that particular city, San Francisco, was that they're going to give out healthy needles. And they assume that this will help out with homelessness, doing heroin, that they would not have to deal with illnesses or infections coming from used needles. Well, now they saw more people using needles for heroin purposes. and they thought that was a solution. So the point I'm making is, preposterous as some of this stuff sounds, some people genuinely believed they were doing more good, but ended up doing more harm than good. And you're going to see this in a lot of political things. Sometimes politics is just a last resort and is simply a reflection of the failures from an individual perspective within a city or state, and showing the decay on innovation, on personal responsibility, personal accountability, and a lot of people resort to the government because they're just blatantly lazy. There's circumstances of that too. And they'll have certain worldviews to continue their sloth and laziness to get free handouts. I know a lot of people like that too. They're just blatantly lazy. They don't want to work. They're degenerate. They're full of excuses. They victimize themselves and feel sorry for themselves. And then they just continue to vote for particular parties that allow them to continue their lifestyle of free handouts. So there's a lot of different people. And then we can go on to the conservative side. People that have a multi-million-dollar business, wealthy, small businesses that hate paying taxes, and are more abolish tax-minded individuals because they want to earn what they make and keep what they worked for. Minded people, they typically want to vote for candidates. They're going to say tax cuts, less taxes, etc., etc. So everyone typically votes, specifically on those particular issues and examples, will vote for what they think is beneficial for themselves. That's what politics is. And the last point I want to make here is that, being a liberal is not bad. Being a conservative is not bad. Most people have good intentions. Now, there's some extremists out there, and those are the minority. But most people need to have discussions about what has worked and what has not worked so we can really move forward and solve these issues that we have currently. I also believe that the things that we have tried in the past that do not work need to end, really. I think it's our generation of Gen X, or excuse me, not Gen X, millennials and Gen Z. We're going to have to come up with new, innovative, creative ideas for our particular issues in our particular timeline, instead of just implementing the same and keeping the same stuff that hasn't been working. That's really the most important thing, that we need to look at the failures of ideas and legislation from previous generations and really say, what should we do? What is a more realistic solution for us to create a better future for our children? Anyways, guys, thanks and take care.